Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the June meeting of the Metropolitan Transportation Authority Board. Mr. Morello, do we have any public speakers?
We do, Mr. Chairman. We have 13 speakers registered today. I would ask that our speakers try to stay on or close to our 2-minute allotment so that we can treat everyone equitably. The first speaker will be Tabitha Decker, and she'll be followed by Denise Richardson. Tabitha Decker.
The board, Chairman Prendergast, Vice Chairman Ferrer. My name is Tabitha Decker. I'm the Director of Research at Transit Center. Transit Center is a foundation working nationally to improve public transportation. I'm here today to speak about the opportunity that we have now in New York City to improve our local buses with the new fare payment system. As you all know, there's currently an RFP to replace our fare payment system with the one that will be the next generation for how we collect fares in New York. There's currently a very important feature that is not required in that system. That's fare validation electronically that would allow us the option to implement all-door boarding. At a time when subway service has been steadily under the burden of increasing ridership, but our buses are facing steadily declining ridership, we think it's really important that we pay attention and dedicate new resources to turn this around. And we think that turning around the decline in bus ridership requires faster and more reliable bus service. All-door boarding on our route citywide could be a very helpful way to achieve this. Boarding through multiple doors is already a standard practice in cities like London and in San Francisco, where it has sped up boarding on the busiest routes by up to 40%. Of course, we're already using all-door boarding on SBS in New York, and that's been a great success. We've seen an improvement in the performance of those buses, and we've also seen a decline in fare evasion rates. Boarding through multiple doors could make our local buses faster across all routes. In such a system, riders could board quickly and seamlessly through both doors, just tapping a card or even tapping their phone. After the fact, inspectors could get on board and see digitally that riders have paid. They could check those very cards or phones that were used to make fare payments without requiring riders to spend their time and the bus's time getting paper receipts. All-door boarding isn't the only tool that we have to speed up buses, but it's one where there's a rare window of opportunity right now. Bids are due on July 15th, and we strongly recommend that the fare payment RFP be amended to include the option to implement all-door boarding on our buses. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Denise Richardson, to be followed by Marty Goodman.
Good morning. I'm Denise Richardson, the Executive Director of the General Contractors Association. In a city where reputations can be made and lost with one sentence, sometimes we are compelled to stop and state the facts. The record must be corrected regarding the professional integrity of the Second Avenue subway contractors and their workforce. Contrary to what was stated in recent media reports, none of the Second Avenue contractors are reassigning personnel on this project to tackle other jobs. Each weekend, for months on end, the contractors have had over 400 people working on various stages of the project. Having reached its most recent completion milestone on schedule on May 31st, Schiavone made the decision to give its workforce the Father's Day weekend off in recognition of them having worked 23 weekends since January, as well as their regular work shifts during the week. To date, the contractors have received over 2,500 amplifying drawings, changes to the scope of work that they originally bid on, and they have been advised that at least 300 are yet to be issued. Since the acceleration program began in January, change orders have continued to be issued, playing havoc with the contractors' plans, schedules, and finances, with millions of dollars of changed work yet to be resolved. In some instances, the contractors have had to remove work that has already been completed and replace it. Examples include ripping out newly installed sidewalks to accommodate a change in concrete color and ripping out fire standpipe systems to change the mounting. Every change that is ordered has cost and schedule implications for this project. The terms of the acceleration program require the contractors to work at risk to achieve the completion dates. This means that they will not be paid for the cost of accelerating their work if they do not meet the schedule. As the contractors assign all necessary resources to meet project milestones, candor and transparency require us to acknowledge that it is very difficult to complete a project when changes are ongoing and decisions that will impact the contractor's ability to advance the work are still outstanding. Thank you for your time.
Marty Goodman, to be followed by Suzanne Adeli.
My name is Marty Goodman. I'm a retired station agent and former TW Local 100 Executive Board member. I am here to oppose Governor Cuomo's undemocratic gag act on state funding to supporters of the worldwide BDS, Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions movement against apartheid Israel. I, like many Jews, fervently support BDS. Israeli occupation, terror, and racism must go. In 2003, I used vacation time to go to Nablus in the occupied West Bank. I stayed with a Palestinian family. I protested occupation every day and roamed its bullet-ridden streets, learning of outrage after outrage. When I left Nablus, the Palestinian father said, "Marty, your family now." I've learned that yet another illegal Israeli settlement is being built on Nablus, defying international law. I'm angry as hell. I demand that the MTA reject and repudiate Cuomo's gag order and the creation of a blacklist of BDS supporters. Free speech is a First Amendment right. I also demand that this board vote down purchases of IBM Technology, page 213, and Goldman Sachs Services as underwriter for the Hudson Yards Trust obligation, page 33. Both IBM and Goldman are heavily involved in the Israeli garrison state. MTA, divest now. Spend money on a decent contract for TW Local 100. Transit workers need wage hikes above inflation to keep up with rising costs. Extend maternity leave for women, improve medical care, and remove second-class pay for new hires. I say equality for all in Palestine, end USA to apartheid Israel, no to Cuomo's McCarthyite gag act, and long live BDS.
Thank you, Mr. Goodman. Suzanne Adeli, followed by David Letwin.
Good morning and thank you. My name is Suzanne Adeli and I'm here representing a national network of workers named Labor for Palestine. Labor for Palestine joins members of Transit Workers Union Local 100 who are here today calling on the MTA Board to reject compliance with Governor Cuomo's Executive Order number 157, an unconstitutional blacklist against those who support boycott, divestment, and sanctions, or BDS. BDS is a global human rights movement which demands an end to the brutal Israeli military occupation of the 1967 territories, full equality for Palestinian citizens of Israel, and the right of return for Palestinian refugees. It has gained growing momentum in recent years, particularly in the wake of Israel's massacre of 2,200 Palestinians, including 500 children in Gaza in 2014, and a 10-year high in Palestinian casualties in the West Bank in 2015. These crimes reflect a system that veteran South African freedom fighters have called, quote, worse than apartheid, quote. That is why BDS is closely aligned to Black Lives Matter and other racial justice movements in this country, and many of its supporters are Jews of conscience. In the past 2 years alone, the BDS picket line has been embraced by West Coast longshore workers of the ILWU, thousands of academic workers in the United Auto Workers and American Federation of Teachers, the United Electrical Workers, and Connecticut AFL-CIO. Such boycotts are protected First Amendment speech and have been used to remedy injustice from the segregated buses of Montgomery, Alabama, to the California grape fields to apartheid South Africa. Today's BDS movement is similar and unstoppable. For as Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. In the judgment of history, the MTA will find no refuge in siding with apartheid Israel or in the excuse that it was just following orders. The only legal and moral choice is to refuse complicity with Governor Cuomo's new McCarthyism. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Adili. David Letwin to be followed by Robert Schwab. Mr. Letwin.
Good morning and thank you. My name is David Letwin and I'm speaking today on behalf of Jews for Palestinian Right of Return. We call on the MTA to refuse to cooperate with Governor Cuomo's unconstitutional Executive Order 157, directing the state to blacklist any institution or organization that respects the boycott, divestment, and sanctions picket line against apartheid Israel. This illegal order is a disturbing assault on the right of free speech and expression, but it is also part of a broader campaign by authorities to intimidate into silence those who stand up for Palestinian human rights and who refuse to accept the legitimacy of a racist regime sustained through ethnic cleansing and dispossession. The BDS call, which calls for the end of the 1967 occupation, full equality for Palestinian citizens of Israel, and right of return for Palestinian refugees, follows in the footsteps of earlier boycott campaigns against Jim Crow and apartheid South Africa, and marches hand in hand and step in step with current liberation movements like Black Lives Matter. In the spirit of these movements, we say to the members of the MTA Board of Directors, don't do business with IBM and Goldman Sachs, corporations on your agenda today, and both of which are deeply complicit with the apartheid Israeli regime, and don't collude with Governor Cuomo's witch hunt against the growing worldwide BDS movement for justice and equality. And the next time you see the governor, please tell him for us that his desperate attempt to muzzle BDS will only make it louder. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Robert Schwab. He'll be followed by John Mooney.
I'm a retired transit worker. I noticed that Cuomo calls himself a Democrat, which means in Greek, the rule of the people. What his policies are anything but. That as Democrats, we should support the struggles of those who are oppressed. And he is doing just the opposite by passing this legislation. I think that the MTA needs to oppose this. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Schwab. John Mooney. He'll be followed by Irving Lee.
Hello, my name is John Mooney. I'm the newly elected chair for the station agent section of TW Local 100. I represent the 2,700 station agents in the subways. I am here today to speak in opposition to Governor Cuomo's executive order that creates a public blacklist that will punish his political opponents, specifically the advocates of the BDS movement, by denying them the right to do business with the state of New York and the MTA. This executive order is an attack on free speech, which violates the Constitution. I am also demanding that the MTA Board not approve the authorization to issue MTA Hudson Rail Yards trust obligations because Goldman Sachs is the underwriter of this obligation. Goldman Sachs invests in Israel, most notably in technology startups. I am also demanding that the MTA Board not approve of the proposed software contract with IBM. IBM also invests in Israeli technology startups. I am opposed to Goldman Sachs and IBM because their investments in Israel lends the legitimacy of the apartheid wall and the military occupation of the occupied territories. The wall and military occupation are crimes against the Palestinians. This must stop. I want to state it loud and clear. I support and advocate for the boycott, divestment, and sanctions of Israel. Justice for the Palestinians is long overdue. Over the years, I have learned that the struggle is all the same. If it's transit workers striking for economic justice or people of color boycotting their oppressor, it's all the same struggle. It's poor people demanding their rights and freedom. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mooney. Irving Lee, to be followed by Ali El Amir.
My name is Irving Lee, and I'm a retired transit worker. I just want to reiterate my support for the BTS in opposition to Cuomo's executive order. But I want to connect the MTA aspect of things. I guess wars that are being spent, money is being spent for wars, especially the wars that are being supported by the neocons and the Project for a New American Century, are wars, or monies are being spent for unjustified actions and a political agenda of the neocons. All that money that's being spent could be used for mass transit and not rely on bond obligations. So that's really what we should focus on, is that looking to oppose the war that's occurring now and finding other means and using that money to finance mass transit. I think that's what the dialogue should be about. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ali El Amir, to be followed by Mr. X.
Good evening. My name is Ali El Amir. I solidarize myself with the discussion which objects to Governor Cuomo's executive order. My point is very simple. It is a discussion among people who support the right of oppressed people. It is not a discussion in which the state should come in with its heavy hand, make a decision, and then make the discussion secondary. We have a right as human beings, we have a right as working people to run our lives, to be respected, and we should not have to deal with a state which opposes that, whether the state is New York, the state is the United States, or an amalgam like the European Union. I also solidarize myself with the objection to association with companies that continue deepen the oppression of Palestinians in their own country. This is immoral. It should be illegal. It's not, but it should be. Hegel said that law and right are the same words. They're not. In any event, I hope that you will be able to see it so that you will oppose Governor Cuomo's executive order, or perhaps speak with him and persuade him not to implement it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. X, who will be followed by Omar Vera.
The April 20 public hearing, which was regarding the M5 and M55 buses, proves the MTA, which stands for Money Thrown Away, has inaccountability. We were supposed to enter this room at 4. We didn't enter until 4:45. Not to mention we had to pass that usual unwarranted security check with the MTA Police Department, which is a bigger joke than the New York City Police Department. Tommy P. Thomasina adopted a bad proposal. He decided these bus routes should be separated at 37th Street, which is already congested with the M4 and Q32 buses. As you know, they ran on 34th Street, now they run on 37th Street. Because the M34 bus, which runs on 34th Street, is now an SBS route. I'm rejecting that proposal for two reasons. A, it doesn't meet the criteria, and B, it's retarded. He should separate the bus routes at Carnegie Hall, which is a lot better. He should use the M6 bus, not the M55 bus, because we were already used to that. That bus route was already used. And there's something else I have a concern about. Although Tommy P. adopted his bad proposal, which is bad from the start, he no-showed, as usual. Is there any particular reason why he can't show at public hearings? That's why he should stay home and be a housewife. All he has to do is wear an apron and a dress. He's too big to wear a miniskirt.
Thank you, Mr. X. Omar Vera, to be followed by Jason Anthony Pinheiro.
Good morning, MTA board members. First, let me congratulate Veronica here for her new post. Hey, we met last month. Second, I just want to say, sorry for the irrelevancy of many of the other comments regarding politics, because this is a transit meeting. We should be focused on transit. All right, but that's another issue. All right, third issue. In fact, if there's any state we should boycott, it should be Cuba, not Israel. Anyway, third issue is let's talk about the LIR first, because I spoke on Monday in support of putting Far Rockaway as part of Zone 3 because it's part of the city, as well as institute city ticket programs to cover that station, as well as to cover to install joint LIR AirTrain JFK ticket machines at Atlantic Barclays. That's the Atlantic terminal, just like they are in Penn Station. Now to the subways. Thank you so much for restoring W train service. I especially give a round of applause to Mr. Albert here. He is the champion of the riders on the MTA board. Continuing with this, I would like to also mention we should be extending the 6 train to the Old South Ferry Station when the 1 train moves back to the new station following the recovery from Sandy. Let's have weekend B service in order to provide more direct connections between 6th Avenue and Brighton on weekends, as there's lack of B service there, unfortunately, but we should have B service on weekends. We should also extend the C to Lefferts Boulevard to give it its own unique character, its own unique route, and have all A trains go to Rockaways. B should also extend the B train during middays to the Concourse line of the Bronx, therefore giving more express local options for D riders during weekday middays. And of course, instead of supporting Governor Cuomo's AirTrain LaGuardia proposal, we should be supporting a construction of the Astoria line extended to LaGuardia Airport with W service serving the Marina Terminal and N service running on all of the terminals of LaGuardia. And finally, we should get funds to extend the 7 train service to Secaucus Junction, New Jersey. Thank you very much, and thanks for having me here.
Thank you, Mr. Vera. Jason Anthony Pinheiro. He'll be followed by our final speaker, Gene Rushinoff. Mr. Pinheiro.
Good morning to all the MTA members on the Wednesday after my birthday. Following the words of my colleague Omar Vera, we should have 4 express service in the Bronx, north of 149th Street Grand Concourse, because if the 6 has it, the 7 has it, why not the 4? My brother-in-law lives along the Drum Avenue line at Kingsbridge Road. It is a total disgrace having local service only around that line. It is not fair doing late nights traveling from the Bronx to Brooklyn in 90 minutes on the D line. What is going on, MTA? We should have more service improvements. Instead of criticizing Governor Cuomo, we should have more service improvements, and that's what we're here for. And once again, I will want to thank Mr. Andrew Albert. He is literally our advocate, and he understands the frustration that we go through every single day as subway commuters. So, having this in mind, I will conclude my monthly speech.
Thank you, Mr. Pinheiro. Gene Rushinoff, the floor is yours.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. I'm Gene Rushinoff with the Strap Hangers campaign, although you can call me Mr. R. The Strap Hangers campaign is here to underscore the views of the Transit Center and other of the transit groups that have spoken to you. In our view, the MTA can and should provide its customers with doors and buses on doors, the doors that permit boarders to ride on more than one door. Riders love buses with multiple entrances for the same reason that subway riders are big fans of countdown clocks that tell arrival times. These improvements make the daily commute much more convenient and tolerable, and they give you a sense that someone gives someone gives a damn about you and your commute. In the past few years, both countdown clocks and, to a lesser extent, but growing, the multiple tours, there's strong positive signs that the system is doing well. You are onto a winner here, in my view. So which do you choose? Engineering advances for buses that are worthy of an MIT, or cardboard models of out-of-date buses that wouldn't make the grade at Trump University? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rushinoff. That concludes the public comment, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you to all the speakers. Once again, welcome to our June board meeting. At the front end of the board meeting, I'd like to introduce some new board members. Veronica Vanderpool, Executive Director of the Tri-State Transportation Campaign and a member of our Transportation Reinvention Commission. James Vitiello, Executive Vice President and co-founder of Vitech Systems Group. David Jones, President and CEO of the Community Service Society of New York. They're all here today, sitting to my right. Peter Ward, who is not here, President of the New York Hotel and Motel Trades Council, and John Samuelson, President of the Transport Workers Union Local, who called me specifically to thank everyone for the support he received to be named to the board, and he extended his apologies that he couldn't be here, but he had a previously scheduled trip to London. Welcome to all of you and to our first full board meeting. It's great to have you here. The Senate also appointed and confirmed Neil Zuckerman as a voting member of the board. He was the Commuter Council representative from New York. Now he represents Putnam County. Reappointed and confirmed John Malloy from Nassau and Carl Wardendyke from Rockland counties. And appointed and confirmed Andrew Solf to return to the MTA Board from Westchester County. Before we move on, I would like to acknowledge the extraordinary contributions to 5 outgoing board members: Jonathan Ballin, Bob Bickford, Alan Capelli, Jeff Kay, and Jim Sidor. Jonathan Ballin served for 5 years, Bob Bickford and Alan Capelli served for 8 years, Jeff Kay served for 10 years, and Jim Sidor served for 22 years, the third longest tenure in this board's history. Each of them served with distinction, and they all have my and previous chairman's sincere thanks and gratitude. Please join me in a round of applause for our new board members as well as the departing ones. The minutes of last month's meeting have been distributed to all members. Are there any corrections or omissions? If not, may I have a motion to approve the minutes? Second? Any comments or revisions? If hearing none, all in favor? Aye. The Committee on Finance, I was the chair. There are 2 action items this month. The first action item requests the board approve an authorization to issue MTA Hudson Rail Yards trust obligations to raise proceeds for the 2005 through 2009 and 2010 through 2014 capital program projects. The second action item authorizes the payment of the state assessment for the Public Work Enforcement Fund for calendar year 2016. The committee recommends these actions, and I move them. Could I have a second?
Second.
Any comments or questions? All in favor? Aye. There are 5 procurements this month in the total amount of $1.4 million. There are no competitive procurements. There are 5 competitive procurements totaling $1.4 million. The committee recommends these procurements, and I move them. Second? Any comments or questions? All in favor? Aye. There are no ratifications. There are 5 real estate items from the committee this month, and the items are described on pages 217 through 225 in the board book distributed for this meeting. The committee recommends these real estate items, and I move them. Could I have a second? Any comments or questions? All in favor? Aye. Transit Committee was chaired by Mr. Fernando Ferrer.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. The Transit and Bus Committee met on Monday and reports the following. There are 4 procurement actions this month in the total amount of $6.6 million. There are 3 non-competitive procurements for $1.6 million for New York City Transit, described on pages 230 to 233 of the board book. The committee recommends these procurements, and I move them.
Second. Any comments or questions? Veronica?
Can we get an update on the request for amending the RFP as discussed during Monday's committee meetings?
The RFP as stands, if you're speaking about the new fare payment system, there is a requirement for all responders to offer an option, priced option, for rear door boarding. That is part of the procurement. The decision as to whether or not we exercise that option will be part of the evaluation when we come back to the board and make an award, which we expect to occur later this year. We understand the importance and value that all door boarding would provide. I don't think anybody takes issue with that. I do think there are a number of significant thresholds that need to be crossed before we do that, not the least of which is being fare evasion and security on buses. But it is a requirement that they submit a priced option for that.
Can I just clarify, though, is that in the section of the RFP that's SBS pilot? Maybe can someone speak to
Mr.
that?
Plachaki will answer that. Steve Plachaki is the Chief Procurement Officer for New York City Transit.
It's a quick response. Yes, it is. It's in that section.
So just to make sure, because this doesn't require that it have a paperless system.
This requires the proposers to put forward not only a narrative proposal, but a price proposal for conducting a pilot that demonstrates new technology that would allow for multiple door boarding and the technology to validate that.
But paperless, or I'm not, just looking at it, it's hard to tell from the language.
Optimally, it would be paperless.
Michael DeVito is here. Michael has been shepherding this procurement for a long. Michael, you can answer the question.
Yeah. The issue here is we're not prescribing or dictating the technical solution. It's a design build, so the contractors obviously that would have the opportunity to propose on what the technology they have. We believe there is paperless technology out there, but we're not dictating that at this point.
The issue of verification of someone having paid the fare is what needs to be done, whether it be by paper or by electronic means. That is one of these significant thresholds that we have to cross. I have run a system that had a honor fare system where you had to verify the fare. It requires staffing. It requires policy decisions with respect to what happens if you find somebody that can't verify. What penalty do you impose on that person? Is it a 10 or 20 times the fare? There are significant issues that will need to be addressed at the time if we exercise that option. But as Steve has said, the method that the proposer uses and proposes on, not only in terms of its functionality, but its cost and how we would have to interface with that to enforce it, is part of the proposal that we're asking them to make.
But we already are doing enforcement on SBS routes. So
Absolutely.
we have a track record on the cost for the Eagle teams, the percentage of fare evasion, and what the penalties are.
We have it, but to expand it across all the routes in the system is something different. We do not have primary responsibility for enforcing fare on the buses, as you know, New York City Police Department does. The issue of manpower, the issue of what benefit provides. Clearly, if we can reduce dwell time at bus stops, that's one way of increasing running time, as is dedicated bus lane enforcement, as is enforcement of people not double parking or parking in bus stops. But that would be all part of the dialogue. But the procurement does require an option for the proposers to submit a proposal to offer rear or multiple door boarding and the means in which we would verify that they had it.
But option, it sounds so, I mean, quite
It's
frankly.
an option on our part. It's not an option on their part. They're required to submit and provide it.
Okay.
I'll give you another example. When we procured the M7 cars years ago, we had a base requirement of 225 cars, I believe, and options for series of cars to be procured at the rate of 200 cars per option. They had to submit a price for those, and the price was assuming 225 plus another 200 plus another 200. We reserved the decision as to whether or not we exercised those options. But at the time of the bid, they had to come up with a proposal, a known proposal that we evaluated in the selection of the consultant. We're following that same pattern. So the decision isn't theirs. If they don't respond in the proposal with an option, it's a non-responsive bid. Isn't that correct, Steve?
They be rated poorly on that. I've got my procurement hat on. In RFPs, you really look at it, you evaluate the proposal. There's not necessarily a responsiveness issue, but that would be a significant detriment to anybody that wouldn't propose, that technology.
Where we're in clear alignment with what everybody's asking is where we can utilize technology to provide means and methods to offer a better, higher quality of service and protect all the necessary functionality we need. We're not going to look that gift horse in the mouth. We're going to ask for that. So that's why the requirement to submit a proposal, price proposal, is there.
With regards to the pilot, how long is the pilot time frame that's written into the RFP?
There's no specific time frame right now. We would develop that as we had conversations with the contractors as well as the project office to determine the suitable time frame.
And why was a pilot program suggested as opposed to full implementation?
Because of the fact that this is an emerging technology and we want to understand how it's going to play in our environment and with with the type of service that we provide, the various types. And the best way to do this is to have a pilot demonstrate that so we can maybe build on that as a part of the proposal.
I appreciate that. But can't that pilot still be implemented without restricting the bidder to just a non-committal almost pilot program? My point is that once you suggest a pilot, bidders can move forward with it, or the selected developer can move forward with it and then say, we've tried it out and we're not so sure we want to move forward with it, as opposed to maybe eliminating the word pilot and just saying, still implementing it without it being under this pilot framework.
Mr. Schwartz?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I just want to make sure, just for discussion purposes, what I heard is that in the RFP process, all bidders, it's going to be mandatory for them to submit on the fair payment system, both, right? And to me, it makes all the sense in the world when you're going to use new technology, which could include paperless or some other technology. As we all know, technology changes radically and rapidly in the world we live in today, so we should be open-minded to any and all options, because it may be something that's coming on board that, we never anticipated, that it makes a lot of sense and we would all embrace it. So we should be open-minded, let the market bring their ideas and creativity to the MTA, and the staff will review it and the board can make a decision on what they think is in the best interest of the ridership. Third thing is, in my opinion, it makes sense to use this new technology in a pilot first. That's what our consultants and staff are supposed to figure out. You put something out there, you try it, you work out all the bugs and kinks, you look for the unanticipated issues or problems that may occur, work it out before we put it in on a system-wide basis. Because if we go to a system-wide basis right off the bat, we run the risk of having significant problems that will negatively impact the ridership. And I think it's incumbent on us as board members that we can discuss what the status is of the pilot project, how well it's running, and how long it needs to continue before we expand it into a system-wide basis. So, I think when we're trying to do something new, it makes all the sense in the world to do it first on a pilot basis, see how it works, work out the kinks before we move forward. So I hope we can just move this resolution forward.
Yeah, I think the good news is, I don't disagree with what you're saying, Commissioner Schwartz. The good news, we have had sort of a pilot, because we have a bunch of SBS routes up and running, and I would just reiterate, I think, the offer on the city's part to have a discussion about how enforcement, fare evasion, et cetera, has worked on those routes, what the costs have been, what the pluses. We actually, luckily, have a bunch of routes that have been up and running for some years where we've been doing a version of this, so I think there's a lot we can learn there and see, again, if there are things that, that the city needs to bring to the table, happy to have that discussion.
But there's no problem. While you're having that discussion, we can move forward on the RFP process.
Yeah, but let's do them concurrently, though. Let's get the enforcement.
No one's saying we won't do them
Yeah.
concurrently.
Okay. Well,
The procurement mechanism provides us for an ability to do that. But I do want to flag ahead of time the significant thresholds that we need to address and cross before we do. in terms of fare evasion, and you have not been part of the discussions because they precede you, especially the new board members that we've had over a number of years. If you take 3 different categories, those systems that are performing in the top third of lowest fare evasion, middle, and then lowest, we're in the top third on subways, on rail performance. We're in the bottom third when it comes to bus performance. And when we've had cases of fare evasion in the city, it's been through rear door boarding, going totally away from where the bus operator is. So we totally embrace the idea of making sure that if we're buying a system that will be with us probably 15 or 20 years, not 30, because the state-of-the-art changes that fast, it has the means available to have multiple door boarding. We totally agree with that. We're just saying we need to make sure that we have a technology or whatever mechanism is that works, and that we don't run roughshod over the issue of fare evasion. It's a very large issue.
Totally agree.
Okay.
We certainly don't want to make fare evasion any worse.
Okay.
In fact, I think the good news of SBS is it appears to have made it better. I recognize that may not work system-wide, but...
Well, it's a significant hit the resources for us, but we'll sort that out.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. Yes, sir.
It's easy to forget at this point. Are we voting on a procurement or on a pilot? Because I want to separate the issues for the purposes of clarity in our discussion. Is this a procurement we're talking about?
There's a procurement out on the street, but it's not in front of the board right now for any type of decision today.
What happened was there was a letter that came in from a number of advocacy groups, technically in terms of public speaking and the board policy, and there's a little bit of room for movement here. Public speakers are supposed to speak to agenda items, and there was nothing formally on the agenda for this, but there was a request in that we owe a response for. The item came up in the Transit Committee, and we didn't, neither the committee chair nor I felt that we would say absolutely positively can't talk about it, but there's no action item open. But in response to the request to make sure that we are not proceeding with the procurement in a way that precludes the ability for multiple door boarding, we wanted to reaffirm it does not preclude that ability, and we will embrace it, provided we need to get proposals from the manufacturers, assess those, and then also deal in the same time frame with those other policy issues. But in answer to your question, there is no action item up before the board today.
Thank you for all the clarifications that you all have provided. I just want to provide a final one on my own. I certainly understand the value of a pilot program and the importance of that. I think where I want to just rest my comment is that I want to ensure that there is a full implementation of a pilot program as a requirement and not minimally just a pilot program that's explored without the commitment for full implementation. And I think my misunderstandings or rather my lack of full knowledge of previous discussions on this have been addressed. So thank you for that.
My last comment, we need to move on. We have discussed, because the board has required a discussion on all the aspects of new fare payment system. The original schedule for this project had it coming forward and going out in the street much earlier than it did. But we have erred on the side of the importance of us procuring a system that provides for all the latest technologies for not only our efficiencies, but for customer quality purposes. So we're a long way between now and when we award this contract, and this won't be the last time we're going to have a discussion on this item. So are there any further questions on the procurements that Mr. Ferrer mentioned? If not, can I have a motion? We've had a motion and a second. All in favor? Aye.
There is one competitive procurement for $5 million for New York City Transit described on pages 234 and 235 of the board book. The committee recommends this procurement, and I move it.
Second. Any comments or questions? All in favor?
Aye. There are no ratifications, and Mr. Chairman, this concludes the Transit and Bus Committee report.
Ms. Metzger chaired the Combined Railroad Committee meeting, but before she starts with the report, there was an item that was discussed during the meeting, had to do with respect to a procurement of an item with Siemens, and Mr. Merdler raised some questions that we're trying to get answers to. I think the board and Mr. Merdler deserve answer to those questions, so I asked the president of Long Island, Pat Nowakowski, if we could hold that procurement and not move forward with it. until we get answers to those questions, and he has agreed to that. So that's the difference between what was discussed at the committee. We are pulling that part. It's a Siemens procurement for, I think, parts for the diesel locomotives. Is that right,
Chairman, I thank you for your courtesy.
Thank you. Ms. Metzger? Yes.
Pulling the entire item
No,
or just the Siemens
just
item?
the Siemens portion. I'm
So
sorry.
the other two bidders are still going forward?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thanks for clarifying that. I'm sorry, Susan.
Quite all right. Good morning. The Metro North and Long Island Railroad Committees met jointly this month and report the following. There are 12 procurement actions in the total amount of $95 million. There are 2 non-competitive procurements, one for Long Island Railroad in the amount of $35 million, and one for Metro North Railroad for $310,000. The committee recommends these procurements, and I move them.
Second. Any comments or questions? All in favor?
Aye.
There are 9 competitive procurements for Metro North Railroad totaling $38.6 million. The committee recommends these procurements, and I move them.
Second.
Second.
Any comments or questions? All in favor?
Aye.
There is 1 ratification for MTA Capital Construction for $3.9 million. The committee recommends this ratification, and I move it.
Second.
Second.
Any comments or questions? All in favor? Aye.
This concludes the report of the joint Metro North and Long Island Railroad Committees.
Thank you, Susan. The Bridge and Tunnels Committee was chaired by Mr. Pally this month. Mr. Pally?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Bridges and Tunnels Committee met this month and reports the following. There was 1 procurement this month in the total amount of $1.933 million. There are no non-competitive procurements. There is 1 competitive procurement in the total amount of $1.933 million. The committee members who were present at the committee meeting considered and voted in favor of the procurement, although a committee quorum was not present for the vote. I move the board approve this procurement item.
Any comments or questions regarding those? All in favor? Aye.
There are no ratifications, and this concludes the Bridges and Tunnels report.
Thank you, Mr. Pally. I chaired the Corporate Governance Committee meeting this month, and I report the following. There are 3 action items for board approval. The first action item requests the board approve MTA's mission statement and authorize submission of the mission statement, measurements, and performance indicators report to the Independent Authority's Budget Office. The next item approves the revised All-Agency General Contract Procurement Guidelines and the All-Agency Service Contract Procurement Guidelines. The last action item approves the proposed revisions to the Audit and Safety Committee charters. The committee members who were present at the committee meeting considered and voted in favor of the action items, although a committee quorum was not present for the vote. I move the board approve these action items.
Second.
Any comments or questions on any of them? All in favor? Aye. The Audit Committee was chaired by Mr. Ferrer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Audit Committee met earlier this morning but did not have a quorum. Normally, the Audit Committee and its actions are not brought to the full board, but because we did not have a quorum today, I am reporting that the Audit Committee met and approved the extension of Deloitte's contract as independent auditor for an additional year.
Second? Any comments or questions? All in favor? Aye. That concludes
the report, Mr. Chairman.
That concludes the business of the June Metropolitan Transportation Authority Board meeting. May I have a motion to adjourn the meeting? Second? All in favor? Aye. Thank you very much.
All right, I'll take. Tom?
Just a second. He's just finishing his statement. We're saying that Beth DeFalco is on board, as you probably know. Wanted to give it the benefit of the lay of the land. That's what we wanted to do. Kate, go ahead.
So Governor Cuomo sent you a letter yesterday. What were your thoughts when you received that? What was your reaction?
Well, I think the governor's been pretty clear. We asked for a change in legislation with respect to what the penalties would be for those types of crimes, on the subway, and he was supportive of that before. I think when we went out with our ad campaign telling people what was the right type of behavior on a subway and also telling people to, if they have something happen to them, that they should report it, is an indication that there is a different scale of awareness and sensitivity to the issue. So I treated it in that spirit. I think it's something that we need to take to task, not only the MTA, but the New York City Transit Police Transit Bureau, because it's important that people feel safe and secure when they ride our system, whether it's the bus network or the subway network.
But there seemed to be a bit of a disconnect between what we heard on Monday when Chief Fox said the reason for the increase is not that there's an actual increase, it's that the reporting of them is better, whereas Cuomo seemed to take it as, oh, there's an increase.
I think you should talk to Chief Fox, who I have a lot of respect for, with respect to exactly what he meant. Whether or not people report more on any subject category versus there's an actual increase, there's always a dialogue on that issue. When it comes to the same famous phrase, perception is reality, and I think we need to deal with it at that level. So if people's sensitivity is raised to the extent that they're reporting it more often, we need to make sure that we're ramping up our levels of enforcement collectively between us and New York City Transit Bureau to make sure that we're responsive to that. And I think that's the important thing we need to leave our customers with.
For all the talk of the new technology, the MTA still has some 20th century problems. LIRR had issues later, signal problems all the time. What are you doing about that?
It's probably, I get asked in a lot of forums what are the most difficult challenges we have at the MTA, and that's certainly one of them. You ride other systems and you see technology that doesn't exist here, and people go, why? And so the governor's asked me to step up the pace, because sometimes we say we're moving into the 21st century, and he'll look at his watch and go, Tom, it's 2016. When are we going to get on with it? So it's a frustration collectively across all the agency heads and the agencies. It's far more difficult to incorporate new technology in a system that was designed at the turn of the 19th to the 20th century. So just in the area of countdown clocks, because that's one where on the IRT or on the numbered lines it's there, and people are saying, why aren't we seeing it on the lettered lines? And we are coming up with proposals to advance that. So in a general sense, that's what we're doing. People, it's no longer a nicety, it's an expectation that we have these levels of technology in the system.
I think to my question, I was also asking about some of the infrastructure things. People hear about the countdown clocks and the things that are the niceties, but also LIRR was messed up yesterday. There have been significant rush hour issues there. Signal issues happen all the time. I guess, are you doing both of these things at once? Is it a weird time to be the MTA chairman where you're dealing with really problems of the past and the challenges of the future?
Oh, that's a very good question, and we actually have a number of parallel paths. In some cases, we're advancing new technology in new areas, in other places, new technology to improve the quality or level of service that we have. In the area of signals, we're moving more aggressively with communication-based train control for additional throughput, and struggling with the issue of how we can get access to contractors so they can, in their favorite words, get in, get done, and get out. And it's a constant challenge for a system that operates 24/7 and sees the levels of ridership that it has.
Can you tell us what realistically can be done to cut down on this perception that sex crime, sex abuse is up in the subway?
We need to make sure that the frequency of occurrence decreases. We need to make sure that when it is reported, where actions are being taken by the appropriate parties. In some cases, that may be a uniform presence that changes behavior. It may be a non-uniform presence that when something happens, people see someone take an action. If you in life know that you're at a traffic intersection, it's late at night, there's not a lot of people around, but you see a squad car, you're probably not going to run a red light. But if you think you may, there's some people that do. And so in those cases, they have people that just come out on, non-uniformed, and they issue tickets. So those are the types of things that are done. We want to make sure that we have raised the level of the consciousness and awareness, somewhat of the customer, but it's there, of our own employees and the people who are responsible for the actions. It needs to get to that level.
So more uniformed and ununiformed personnel, law enforcement personnel in the subway, then, is the solution?
I will leave the issue of deployment with respect to what type of deployment and how they deploy to the experts. Mm-hmm. Police are very good at knowing how they can identify, once a particular crime behavior is identified, what they can do in terms of deployment of resources, uniform, non-uniformed, level of coverage, visible, not visible, to get that done. I defer to those experts. we will actually put the challenge out to our own people in the police department to do that, and I'm sure we'll get the response that we need.
Just to follow up on those comments you made about the technology and getting the directive to step up the pace and that these things are no longer niceties, they're necessities. You just had a debate about bus technology to speed up bus travel, and you and another MTA board member slowed down that talk, saying, well, there needs to be a pilot and you have to weigh bus fare evasion. So where is the MTA stepping up the pace? And on technology, particularly when it comes to buses, proof of payment on a system that, as you saw in the mobility report, is shedding riders by the millions over the past several years?
Well, there's a number of pieces there. First of all, I take exception that we're shunning technology, okay? I take exception to that. Anything we can do to bring new technology in the system to improve the efficiency of operation, improve the level and quality of service, we will embrace. The difficulties associated, like I told Mr. Mocker, in terms of how we do it, is what the challenge is. In this particular case, there are issues that affect revenue that we get, so we've got to be a little careful. We are in total alignment with the parties that are saying, make sure the proposers offer technologies that will give us those efficiencies, and we'll take a look at that. So that's without question. The other thing we need to, when we talk about how do we deal with a medical situation like we had Ebola, the medical experts said, be guided by the science. Let the science dictate what actions need to be taken. If you get outside the medical arena and you're talking about operations, be guided by the facts. The facts with respect to why is bus ridership falling? Is it related to fares? Is it related to service? Is it related to on-time performance? Is it related to running time? And with respect to the issue of running time, dwell time for boarding and alighting is an issue, but it's one of a number. Dedicated bus lanes are an issue. Bus stop enforcement is an issue. All the issues related to traffic signalization is an issue. And we need to make sure we're taking a look at all those and not single one out unless for sure we knew it would give a 70 or 80% return on investment in terms of reducing it. That's the level of analysis we need to go to. On a parallel path, because we are procuring a system, we want to make sure that we have the technology available that doesn't preclude us from having multiple door boarding. Plain and simple.
But just to follow up, there are other cities doing this. It's common. Polly Trottenberg mentioned it. This is already being tested with slips of paper on select bus service. So when the question comes, why not do it on all bus routes, what else do you need to look at?
First of all, you need to find out what other systems do. You need to find out what their level of fare evasion is. You need to find out what their level of enforcement is, and what penalties do they assign for people who are caught not having a fare media. Those are significant policy issues. If you say to someone that I'm going to check to verify that you've paid a fare, and all that you're going to get penalized is you have to pay the fare if you didn't, you will have a fairly high level of fare evasion, because they'll roll the dice. But if you tell them if you get caught, we're assuming you've done it a number of times, we're going to charge you 10 times the fare or 20 times the fare, and some systems do that, then it's a different dynamic. But that's also not a threshold this board will cross lightly, so that's part of the discussion. The issue of Eagle Team resources, which are our resources that we use to enforce on SBSs the assurance that someone has paid the fare, is no small undertaking in terms of the number of people and the costs associated with it.
But so have you looked at other cities then? There's London.
We're looking at a number of other cities, but we're looking at cities in North America primarily there because the social issues are different.
Hello. So since this is David Jones's first meeting, he's talked about a reduced fare for the MetroCard, and the board will be taking up fares later this year. Is that something that the MTA will at least examine? His group released a proposal about how you might be able to finance something like that.
Every 2 years, we go through a process of reviewing tolls and fares. We're on a 2-year cycle. We look at issues with respect to tolling on our bridges and tunnels. We look with respect to fares on the commuter railroads and the bus system and the subway. So that will certainly be an issue that we'll look at.
Well, I mean, this is an unrelated question, but can you update us on the status of the Utica Avenue extension study that was funded by the capital plan?
I can't off the top of my head. The program just got approved.
Okay.
I'm just wondering about, with the revelations of what happened at Hudson Yards with the waterproofing that didn't work, are you and is the board concerned that there might be issues with Second Avenue that aren't being revealed to you guys and that you're going to be hit with at a later date, given that, you know, the talk about staffing issues on Monday?
Well, the staffing issues and the waterproofing issues are totally separate. But with respect
Well, I'm
to
just saying
with
in
respect to
terms
the
of things that you don't
waterproofing-
know.
With respect to the waterproofing at 7 West, a number of actions are being taken to address that, but we're also doing a holistic review that we've asked a number of questions to make sure that it's complete with respect to what could we have done to prevent it in the first place. The staffing issues in Second Avenue are totally different issues. And in actual fact, in contrast to what was stated Monday, I think it was accurately stated by one of the public speakers today, that when observations were made, nobody there this weekend, it was for the reason that was said. They had worked every weekend this year. They're on schedule, if not ahead of schedule, and that company made a decision for its own reasons to give them Father's Day weekend off. But they are on schedule, if not ahead of schedule, and it's a non-issue. And all the other contractors are working very hard. We've brought them in. They know the importance of a December 31st completion date and in-service operation date for Second Avenue Subway.
Just to follow up with that, are you confident that you're getting enough information to properly assess the movement of the project? There was concern on Monday about
Second
details.
Avenue?
Yes.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's reviewed by the independent engineer. It's reviewed by another separate layer. Larry Schwartz and I review it on a regular basis. We keep the board members updated. There is always time a board member says, I didn't know about that. That's my responsibility to bring them up to speed. But in answer to your question, are we getting enough accurate reads with respect to the performance of that project? The answer is yes.
Mr. Chairman, maybe Pat would want to answer this as well. We were told about last year in September that the railroad was working on a backup power system for the signal problems. What is the progress of that? Would that have prevented last night's problems closer to Amtrak?
I don't believe the backup power system would have prevented last night's incident or would have mitigated it. But there were some failures in one of the interlockings in the Penn Station complex. Amtrak, I think, had some difficulty troubleshooting that problem. But it's way too early to say in a detailed fashion, forensically, exactly what happened, because they need to do a detailed review and investigation, and we generally are part of that.